If you're a discerning, open-minded, and dedicated seeker who loves a good deep dive into the nature of reality and consciousness, then do check out my book, The Grand Illusion, composed of over 10,000 hours of research and experience. Find more information and reader reviews at brendandmurphy.com/TGI. There, ladies and gents, welcome to this episode of Truthverse, episode 45. I'll be joined by Asa Santiago, who's based in the US. He is a nutritional dietary wizard who I connected with on Facebook not that long ago, actually. And I was struck by the density of and breadth of knowledge that he had in his posts. I was like, oh, wow, this guy has clearly been doing a lot of study. And I thought, you know, great, I can get him on and ask him a million different questions about the things that I'm interested in and don't have the same amount of knowledge as he does. So young dude, got a lot of passion, a lot of knowledge. He studies every day and really has quite detailed knowledge in some very obscure areas around diet, nutrition, and you know, obviously that branches out into quite technical and obscure places. So quite a compelling conversation. We covered a bunch of dietary stuff. Definitely not the usual conversation, which is one of the reasons I got him on, because he's not you know, on to push one of these dogmas, one of these fads that you see floating around. We'll learn his journey, how he got to where he got to, how he resolved his health issues, how he approaches parasites and problematic microbes, his basic philosophy on food, detoxing, approaches to allergies, causes of allergies, gut health. We talked about antibiotics and the problems with them. The importance of animal fats. We talked about ketosis. And, you know, some of this might sound like, oh, yeah, you know, I've heard this before, but maybe you haven't heard it like this. And I value that about Asa. He is, yeah, he's a phenomenal source of information. So we covered heaps of stuff. I don't know how long the episode goes for exactly, but it was definitely more than 90 minutes. I think it might be more than like an hour and 3/4 possibly. So we covered a lot. It takes a little while to get going. We sort of meandered through his personal journey and story and built up to the sort of meaty part of the interview. And then once we got there, the rocket launched and it was, you know, he was all guns blazing. Yeah, very on point, very focused. You know, he got in the zone and, you know, I just let him go for it. So I think you'll enjoy it. I definitely did. There was a lot of information. I'm probably going to need to come back and re-watch or re-listen to it for my own benefit. And what else? Let me see. What am I forgetting here before I let you launch into it? No, I think I've covered most. All right. Well, episode 45 of Truthverse. Asa Santiago joins me. Remember to subscribe, like, share the information if you find it useful. And in the meantime, I will see you out and about, or inside truth.network.
The reason why I started is trying to help heal people and be able to survive at the same time. Like, I feel like I'm on this mission to just really try to change the world the best I can, and I'm functional about that mindset. So I think that the root cause to all of our problems is health. Like, if you were to get the vast population of people, regardless of if they have more of like a follower mindset, if they're healthy, they're a lot more discerning. You know, the reason why I came into this is because when I started going through this diet and changing my life and healing myself, my brain fog abated to whole other levels, to the point that I became a lot more awake. Like, I could see patterns that were seemingly non-existent exist. And my logic increased and I was able to see more broadly. And so I want that for other people. I think a lot of people are suppressed in their thinking because they just can't get there. They're just mental blocks. Like, if you heal, even with just nutrition functionally, you can become a different person in your mindset, your mood, and your spiritualism and everything. And I've always been very logical. It's hard for me to even believe in something like God, but like, I've really become more spiritual also since healing too. So it's multifactorial. It's huge. And so I think it's very important that people get to a new threshold in health. Like, a lot of people aren't fully aware of this. And even my truther friends, we tend to disagree on a lot of things, and that's okay. But, you know, I try to be the best contender in that realm. I debate PhDs, natural doctors, registered dietitians, everyone I can find to essentially push the marker forward on the truth behind actual metabolic health and what's needed to get to a better state where you can abate the pathogens or get rid of the heavy metals or the xenobiotics within the body that essentially are causing what are called disturbances within what's a systems biology model. Systems biology is kind of like, say, for instance, you're a diesel mechanic. You have to have some kind of a systems mindset to do that. You'd have to understand what each component of the engine or the chassis, whatever, like every part of the vehicle, you have to understand as a construct and a system to it. So I took this on more seriously after I did a little bit of work for Dr. Shiva. He was kind of pushing the system science perspective. He's saying that it applies to politics too. You can see corrupt government form through a system science model. It's not easy for people to understand, but if you were to take it a little more broad and you were to look at things like a tree is a system, like a tree, like its root system and its branches, these can be seen as like the whole structure of the system. And within it are these inputs and outputs, and then there's disturbances. Like some trees, their whole species can be like wiped out by one fungus, right? You could see that as a disturbance, right? Or one fungus in one area. I wouldn't say that the whole species across the world, but some fungi can get within a tree and just destroy it. And I believe this is similar with people. But ours is a little more benign and a little more commensal. Commensal means that they're kind of there to exist, but they supply the body with some benefits so that the immune system isn't seeing them as like complete enemies. They're not necessarily pathogenic, but they're opportunistic. But and to bridge it right into that is that that's more my specialty is the microbes and their natures. And I wrote a whole scientific theory on that. It's called Opportunism Theory. I haven't fully released it. It's in a beta stage right now. I'm just having other professionals close to me read it with me and get their backing before we try to move forward with like publishing it in a journal. So I'm very serious about that particular process because anyway, I'm going into like a whole thing here. I apologize. Remember when that one chick said in the comment, like, you had him at tangent. Yeah.
I like that.
I go on like a machine gun without any ends of the bullets. Like, but anyway, so that's my whole thing. I was sick. I got into alternative medicine to heal myself and I was also didn't realize how sick I was. I was just trying to fix my superficial health because I wanted to get more women. And so I just,
as good a reason as any, my brother.
And now that I'm in this world, I'm realizing that's what everyone's reason is. It's like, it's always something superficial. Like I want to have better mental health so I can fit in with my family better. Or I want to, live longer so I can see more of my family. Or I want to be more virile so I'm good with the ladies. Or I want my skin to look good so women are attracted. Or whatever. It's like, it's always something that has to tie into society. And there are obviously those extremely rare few who go out into the wild and would be okay there forever and never see a human again for the rest of their lives. I mean, some people are like that. A lot of times it has to do with trauma. Sometimes it has to do with their nature, but like, I'm not that person. I'm way more extroverted. I'm like forced to be around people. So anyway, it's the whole thing. But yeah, I healed myself. Now here I am. And I still have more to do for sure. There's some things that I haven't perfected yet, but I'm working on them. They're something that it's crazy how you can self-heal to this capacity. Like the things that I've healed, I'm like, wow, why didn't doctors talk about this? That's what really woke me up. Like, that's what made me realize, holy crud, like the system's corrupt. You guys have billions of dollars invested into your work, and me for free managed to figure out the answer to healing all of these diseases. Like, there's something seriously wrong with it. Like, that connection was something that I think some of my, and I don't mean to insult my friends who are ASD, but sometimes they can't connect those dots. Yep. And I guess in a lot of ways, like I'm happy to be in this position because I can connect those dots for people. They just kind of have to trust me. And that's the hard part without like a medical degree or any kind of degree for that matter. I was unschooled. So I just have to be like, well, I mean, here's thousands of epidemiology papers that I've read. I mean, there's that. But I still have been working on getting those together. I have them all in bookmarks. And I had to like pay someone to put them in some kind of like a PDF. I don't know. But yeah. Anyway, go ahead. That was it. Like that's my whole thing. I had this big vision on it. But,
well, yeah. we can touch on that and whatever you want. I want to, if I can, is it possible to talk about some of your specific challenges that got you on this journey in which you've sort of more or less conquered along the way?
Yeah.
And also I want to know how you conquered them. I mean, what your protocols looked like, what your process looked like as well. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So a while back, I posted this whole story of my whole life, and I try to kind of make that more public view for people. I'm a shameless person. That's why I'm really good at sales. I have no problem getting in someone's face, telling them literally anything on my mind. So it wasn't hard for me to share my whole story. I can understand with everyone else why no one's doing that, especially all the trauma victims, like, were similar to me. Like I had a sexual trauma happen to me when I was 3. Okay. And that was just part of my problem. And so I developed a sexual identity around it. And for the longest time, I obviously thought it was natural, but my connect the dot brain was already going when I was 12. I was realizing that it was not only odd, but totally unnatural what I was liking, as compared to every other kid who was like me. I'm like, why am I different from other kids? That doesn't make any sense. And then I looked at history and everything, and I just connected all these dots very quickly. So I just knew I was sick. I think a lot of people don't right away acknowledge or have the capacity to understand or kind of branch out to finding out that they're sick. And so I ended up going through that whole thing. The molestation was by the hands of a woman. So I developed these sexual proclivities for women who are far more domineering, like abusive. And so this is very well known within like communities of like the BDSM world and all the alternative things within sex. And I didn't know anything about this as a kid. I was kind of like following my desires, whatever. And obviously I was estranged because I told my friends at school, same diarrhea mouth, and they kicked me out of their group. And I was like really distraught. So my mother unschooled me after that. It was middle school. So I just kind of like stayed at home and kind of taught things myself and just figured life out while being extremely clinically depressed and anxious. I mean, I was so anxious that I was a germaphobe, like to the point of like I was gloves on, not really touching anyone with anything and trying to like be real far away from my friends. Like people did not really like me a lot, like because of that. And yeah, I was just super creating all these boundaries all the time, and I didn't realize that like you create more boundaries when you're more anxious, you're more weak, you're more like sensitive. I didn't realize that I was like that physiologically. I didn't realize it was a physiological problem at all. I thought it was just like me, I'm just sensitive, I'm a hypercritical, I'm a, hypochondriac, whatever, And that's what the world that I lived in led me to believe. And that's another part as to why I feel that I've been deceived greatly. But anyway, so I moved through that. I got my first job at like 18. I didn't really get rid of all the problems then, but I felt better about myself. I needed to attach myself to something, to feel important, kind of like why kids go join the military. They want to feel important. They want to feel included, like they're doing something, be a part of something bigger than myself. So I did that. And then I added on to it because I was trying to, at the time, like I was in the mindset of killing myself. And I just lived off of coffee, number one, to get rid of my brain fog. I just like coffee was helping me out a lot. So I worked for Starbucks for like 3 years. And what else? So I ended up for 4 years of that. I went on this whole journey to essentially abstain from sex because it was out of romance, not for God. I was just wanting to hold myself, to find the right woman. I was obviously so estrogenic at the time. I didn't really, it didn't really work out anyway. Like even if I went and tried to go and date someone, I probably would have fucked it up. But I just altogether abstained. And I also said to everyone I was going to become the president. And I just went with that. Like I was literally like trying to get into politics without knowing anything about politics. I was just like, well, I know what's right. So I don't care what all the inner workings are. I'm just going to do it, And I did that for 4 years. And that was like the hardest job of my life too. Starbucks, like people think it's easy to like go and serve coffee at a window, but literally they take every second of your day from you when you're there, or every moment. There's no break. You get a break during your 10-minute breaks. You get a break during your 30-minute breaks. And when you're a shift supervisor, you're urged you're almost incentivized to not even take some of those 10-minute breaks. But like for instance, you have to like brew coffee every like 30 minutes. Yeah, it's on a timer. This big thing of coffee, you have to grind the coffee, put it in a basket, brew it. And that takes like 5 minutes. And then you go back to the register to ring people up, clean the counter, keep everything really nice at the same time, and then go back, brew the coffee again, whatever. Like it doesn't end. And when you're a supervisor, it's even worse. But anyway, I digress. It's that was still a good time for me because I learned a lot about people. I learned a lot about myself. I had my clinical depression for sure, but the job kind of kept me away from that. So anyway, we moved to Tahoe, and this is where my health journey started. I met this girl that I really liked. She was like this epitome of femininity. Femininity is like kind of dead today. It's super hard to find a feminine woman. So I was like head over heels, but obviously I was still somewhat estrogenic as a guy, and I didn't know that. I thought I was fine. People in San Francisco area, Bay Area, all that, they were kind of like, oh, that's just you, I'm like, okay, well, it's not working. And so anyway, I just went with it and tried to court her. And she was doing all kinds of things, like all the whole, she was in the drug world and the orgy world and the mega, hippie living on the edge, always pumping the adrenaline all the time kind of girl. And I was kind of the opposite of that. I've always been kind of, I wasn't even into health. I was still really staunch about things. Like I still didn't go and do any of that stuff. It was just too much for me. I like to control my mind. I don't like it to be, my friends wanted me to go do psychedelics with them, go on a trip, talk about all these esoteric things and whatever. But I know I'm not the person to do that. I'm already like throughout my elementary and middle school years, they were calling me the stoner. I mean, it's just because my eyes were like that. Like, and then when I tried to do a little bit of community college, I did for like 2 years. Like my teachers would accuse me of coming in high, and I'm like, okay, whatever. And anyway, so we didn't work out. But I was so sensitive back then. My heart was like literal broken status. Like it was so bad. I was losing hair, and I was like just becoming very ill from it. I even got sick for like 3 or 4 weeks, and it was bad. And anyway, I started to ponder sometime after that, like, hey, why? I started to think like, oh, it's naive me at the time, didn't realize that we're just not compatible based on lifestyle factors. But then I didn't really know. So I just looked at my skin. I was like, oh, I have this chicken scratch on my skin. So I started like Googling it. And I just went through the whole research. Like, I'm kind of relentless about research because I'm pretty ADD. And so I obsessed about it, and then I figured it out. I was like, oh, it's a yeast infection. So I started eating in a certain way and treating myself in a certain way to abate yeast. I was like, and then all of a sudden, my depression just died. My anxiety went with it. And I was like this completely different person. I'm like, what the heck just happened? And it came in tandem with like, and this is kind of TMI, but like what came out of me was this huge, massive thing of biofilm, like yellow tendrils everywhere. It was massive. And my depression was gone. I'm like, holy crud, like getting rid of this fungus beast was like, that thing was the root of my issues. The issues that I didn't know that I had, that I thought were just me. So that's what kind of started me into that. So I started reading at least an epidemiology paper a day since then. And that was in, I was 22. So it's been almost 7 years now. And so I've been doing that, and it just kind of hasn't stopped. And I went through a whole journey with that. It's a very long story. With like, because while I did abate those mental issues, I still had the sexual problems. I had the estrogen issue still. I didn't even know it was an estrogen problem. I just knew that I had those sexual proclivities still. So I ended up going to San Francisco, moving away from Tahoe. I had a whole journey with Tahoe and everything, but it's not really relevant to the health thing. So I ended up going to San Francisco and trying to explore myself more and figure this stuff out, and to just be a man in a lot of ways too. So I was paying my rent, got a job. Well, I got a lot of jobs. A lot of them didn't work. I was even fired from one because I didn't fit, but I ended up, what was the one of the jobs? Oh, well, I actually ended up just doing event marketing. It was really nice because I could work when I wanted to. Like, they're paying anywhere from like $20 to $30 an hour. And it was usually on weekends, but sometimes on weekdays. I'll just fill my schedule out and have days off when I wanted days off. And that was fun. I liked that. It was cool. And then eventually I got a job with like a restaurant, working those on weekends for tips, because the tips were really great in that area. Because I was living in Marin County. It's actually north of San Francisco. It's where a lot of very wealthy people are. I even met Robin Williams there, a few others, just can't remember their names. But anyway, long story short, did the whole San Francisco thing to discover myself more. I ended up in the BDSM clubs, and I found a mistress right away. And it's very weird because statistically speaking, there's at least like 1,000 dudes per one of those in that world. I mean, it's extremely competitive, and it's horrific because a lot of the people who are within that whole submissive realm, a lot of them tend to be business professionals who have a lot of money and are very successful. And, me, like, just going in there being this dude who's a brand ambassador, like, obviously I have my attractiveness, but I was still myself. Like, I've always been a leader. So I had no problem approaching women. So I just approached her. And I think that's the difference between me and everyone else, is like, yeah, I just hit her up, So ended up working out. She's a very, I can't necessarily fully describe her because I did a whole thing with her where I signed an NDA. It was a very serious relationship because she was someone who was very powerful. And so I had to kind of keep her identity very secret. So anyway, we had like a whole thing. It was very eventful, very scary for me, because she was a very harsh woman. Like if I thought I had fantasies of something, online or otherwise, like she was reenacting them, but like in a more raw and real state. And it was very hard. It was like to the point, like I felt like my soul was being wrenched from my body. It was terrific. But like some part of me really wanted it because it was so attracted to that darkness, from my trauma. But I didn't realize, because along the way, we ended up kind of separating ways a little bit. because I had screwed something up. I said like her name in public or something, and she kind of just disowned me after that. And I ended up meeting this girl right after that. Like, she was more of like the girlfriend version. She was extremely sadistic, and she was super into that stuff. Kind of like very, like one of those, you know, autistic women you would meet at like a library or something, you know. She would kill me if I said she was autistic. So, but she's not like, she's just kind of got some nuances to it. So I'm not going to like say she is, but there's some parts of her that kind of were like missing, so to speak, like kind of the emotional intelligence thing. And I'm more confirmed by that because I've actually met women who were like that, who went through homeopathy and fecal matter transplant surgery to then cure themselves. They don't have that emotionless healing anymore and are not nearly as sadistic. One woman did reach out to me about that some time ago. But anyway, so I went through that with her. I was at the time still doing my hardcore organic paleo-like diet. And that's pretty much what I was doing the 4 years ago. Like when I was doing when I started when I was 22 at the time, I started like an organic paleo diet.
Was that
right?
Sorry to jump in. Was that organic paleo thing what you were doing before in order to remedy the yeast infection thing?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So
that was effective.
Being inherently lower in sugar is more ideal, but all those practitioners at the time that I was following, like Dr. Act, were still saying you could do rice and stuff. I didn't realize that was more of my problem, because biochemically, I wasn't thinking in the back of my brain that carbs convert to sugar by twice the amount. And so I was like, oh, you know, when I figured that out, it was kind of like already by the time I was discovering carnivore. And it was funny because my vegan sister was the one who recommended carnivore to me after seeing the podcast from Joe Rogan. And I was doing, but before that, for 6 months, I was experimenting with raw paleo. It included raw carbs, but it was all based on a foraging standard, which is the paleo diet. Mm-hmm. And I guess you couldn't really say that rice is very paleo, though. But whatever. I mean, anyway,
we'll have to allow it.
Anyway, I was all organic, whatever. I was very no added sugar, all that. But I was very antifungal too. So I was using things like grapefruit seed extract. I was using like coconut oil. I was using probiotics, all that, but in a messy way.
Yeah, right.
I mean, now for my clients, you know, when I suggest anything to them, like you want to do it more intelligently, you want to be like it's something called an antigenic escape. So when you can teach these microbes what you're doing. So I tell people to take a break. You know, there's a point at which it goes too far. You don't want to go days and days and days and days just killing, because they go into dormancy or they don't, you know, they learn and then they start to adapt to that particular material that you're using to cleanse them with. So I always just recommend like you take a break and then you hit them again with something different afterwards. And I'm finding that it's more effective post-fast. So if you were to go through like a day and a half dry fast, like 36 hours, it seems to have more potency to it, largely perhaps because they come out of hiding to go and get some food after being starved out.
Interesting.
Yeah. But the cleansing only goes so far. It gets you through, it gets you to like a threshold. It gets you somewhere where you need to be before you can get into something better. And that's why I believe carnivore comes in, where you're just eating meat and dry fasting for your healing. And that's generally what I try to get people to over a period of time. But they had to do responsible carnivore. They can be very much easily done wrong. And it also depends on the person too. I wouldn't say that. And I think for some people, they can jump right into carnivore while being chronic fatigue syndrome status and not fix their chronic fatigue syndrome at all. It's because chronic fatigue syndrome is linked to all kinds of problems. Yeah. And each person is different with that too. Like if I get someone with CFS, I'm like, we got to investigate this because there's no one cause. But anyway, so I was doing raw paleo for 6 months prior. And I actually broke up with my sadistic girlfriend when I first started that 6 months thing, because I accidentally stopped liking what she was doing. And this was a big part of my life. I was eating raw meat, and I was like, what the heck? Why is this raw meat turning me off from what she does? And my testosterone, I noticed, I became a little more masculine too. I noticed that when I was consuming anything that upped my estrogen, it correlated with my sexual desires of being submissive towards a woman. And it made more sense to me, because estrogen is kind of like the submissive hormone. It's the one that makes a woman want to submit to a man in any way. And so I was like, wait, so if a guy ends up getting this estrogen, theoretically, it makes sense to me. You would obviously submit, so to speak, to, especially so with like these women are more aggressive and masculine, because the same happens to women too. Like they can become more masculine. It's so I ended up becoming compatible with women who were more masculine, and it happened to be all these women who are on birth control. Like my girlfriend at the time, she was on birth control, but because of that, she was getting a 6-pack instantly, and she was also super into like the pegging stuff, like into like ramming guys. Like that was her thing. It's like number one, and that's cool. Like I get it. Like everyone has their own proclivities and everything, but I think it's connected to endocrine destruction. So it's cool if you want to go. Like my opinion on it is like, do your own thing, be your own person, explore your own self. But on some level, I want people to like acknowledge where that might be coming from, you know, because for me, largely, I've had to accept for myself that what I've been through is not natural. Like I've managed to fix it. So that means it's not natural. If you can fix it, it's not. And so I end up pissing off a lot of people when I bring up the hormone thing, because everyone feels it on some level. Everyone in our generation right now is like in some way endocrine disrupted. It's like there's no perfect masculine, there's no perfect feminine, and that's okay. You know, when I date now, I don't expect it out of a woman. And for myself, I know that I'm not perfectly masculine, but I have been increasing it over the years due to dry fasting. What will happen is like I'll go to these stints of like, and I can't necessarily track it metabolically in my body, but I have theories on it. Like my beard ended up getting a bit of copper in it on the sides here and here. And I know that when you elevate copper too much in the body, some comes with it some level of estrogen. Copper is also known as like the metal that makes people a little more emotional. And so it makes sense, the relationship.
Yeah.
So perhaps my body was getting rid of some excess copper. And it's funny too that if you're burdened by yeast like Candida, which is the problem that I had, I also believe I have a Malassezia problem. That one's what creates cradle cap. But they're actually finding Malassezia is pathogenic as well. It can actually get into your brain tissue. But no one talked about that. Like they actually think it's the cause of ALS in some cases, but it's not explored well enough. But anyway, so I know it's a scary subject, fungus in your brain, right?
Yep.
That I could go off on that one for a while. But anyway, so the Candida, getting rid of that, the Candida actually can in its own way elevate copper or want more copper in the body. It actually takes the copper and coats it on its hyphate. So when I hear these Morley Robbins, I think his name is Morley Robbins. You don't know, he's this guy who wrote this, you know, the root cause protocol or something like that. And he's very pro, like add copper to your diet. I think that it depends on the bioavailability of that copper. Right. I think the dangerous copper is the copper you're getting from plants, and the good copper is the copper you're getting from something like liver. Right. And that's my theory on it. I just know that with plant bioavailability, it's negligible. And the same with like vitamin K. You get like 10% of that vitamin K from kale, in the human body at least. Well, and so go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't want to cut you off on that thought, but one of the questions I had for you was, you know, the plant debate, and there's a lot of people going in the vegan direction I spent many years actually vegetarian, then transitioning into vegan. Now, basically, kind of erring towards a paleo-ish kind of approach because my partner, Amy, had been vegetarian for 25 years, since she was 8 years old. And she got to a point where she was injured by an injection from a wonderful pharmaceutical company. And then she ended up developing this Hashimoto's hypothyroidism. And she got to the point where the autoimmune paleo protocol was what actually got that under control. And so I just basically ate what she ate, because I wasn't going to go into the kitchen and do my own thing when, I don't want to be in the kitchen anyway. So I'm just eating what Amy eats. And I feel better. As soon as I eat some fish for the first time, I'm like, boom, I'm back in my body more. I feel more solid. I'm not as spaced out. I don't get lightheaded, all this stuff. So I've been in the vegetarian vegan camp, and I really went hard down that road. I encouraged people to look into it and all this stuff years back. And I'm like, and I see the UN now is on this. The UN is a stalking horse for global government, as one guy put it, whose name escapes me at the moment. So the UN is pushing it, which immediately raises red flags. Like, yeah, drop meat, forget the meat. What's your take on plants, lectins? How many plants do you want to incorporate? Is vegan appropriate for anybody? Just a few thoughts around this might be good.
Yeah. Man, that's a long one. I actually wrote a very long article on plant toxins.
Cool.
And the worst of the plant toxins, I'll tell you, are the legumes, the grains, the seeds, and the nuts, and nightshades. So nightshades, pretty sure potatoes nightshade, and there's tomatoes. But any of those starchy category foods can be probably problematic. Ultimately, when you break it down, carbs are the ultimate. They're not the enemy, but they can be engineered to be your enemy.
Right.
And that's a complicated process metabolically or through epidemiology or microbiology. It's very, very complex. But I will say that the plant toxins have their own deleterious problem, and it's usually just the antinutrients for humans. The antinutrients are pretty significant. Obviously, some plant toxins can, on some spectrum create dilated pupils, but it's very rare. And I exaggerate that in my article, you're going to get dilated pupils. That doesn't happen. You'd have to eat so much of that food. And then what was the one? So I would say in order of priority, you want to avoid oxalates. Number 2 would be the lectins. Oxalates and lectins, you can Google all that, but a spinach would be a lot of oxalate. But alternatively, kale isn't a lot of oxalate. So I'm like, well, it's obviously not the green that makes it oxalate abundant. It's just the genera of that plant. And so there are all these different kinds of plant families. I would say the safest plant toxins are among the alliums and the cruciferous. Mm-hmm. So you get those alliums, which are onion, garlic. I'm trying to think of the other one that I use. I'm forgetting it right now, but cruciferous are something that I use too for some clients because they're all low carb. They're low carb and they're low plant toxins. They don't have the plant toxins that are the worst. Mm. They have the ones that are manageable. So FODMAPs are a problem.
Okay.
And then there's the goitrogens. Those are both within alliums and cruciferous. So I would say, well, okay, the FODMAPs are generally within the alliums mostly, and then the cruciferous would be the goitrogens. So goitrogens, have you heard of a goiter? It's kind of yep. You can get this kind of cyst-like. Yeah. So anyway, that can happen if you were to eat too much broccoli and or cauliflower. Technically, people get that. But if you get enough iodine in your diet, it's fine.
Cool.
So those vegans who end up eating a lot of sea kelp or sea moss or whatever, and they get a relative amount of iodine in their diet, they can in a way abate the goitrogen issue if they're eating a lot of cruciferous. So I know that there's a lot of vegans who eat their diet responsibly, even raw. And I believe raw is the component by which people achieve glorious skin, glorious hair. I think this just has to do with the enzymes somewhere along those lines. But ultimately, in that sense, you are what you eat. So if you eat it raw, you end up looking raw. That's all I can say. But that's the one correlation between the carnivores and the raw vegans and the raw fruitarians. They tend to have these great looking exteriors. However, I've noticed this prevalence of neurological deficits among those who are long-term vegan. Like they get anxiety, or they have a frenetic kind of energy to them. They kind of, if they were in like a hard fight or like a debate with someone, the emotions can come out very quickly. When I'm debating someone who's like eating just meat, they don't get emotional very fast. They're just kind of a little more at plane. And I believe this has to do with neurotransmitter health within your small intestine, probably around where the jejunum is. So you have the duodenum, the jejunum, and then the ileum. They're the three sections of the small intestine. Jejunum is generally where you absorb most of your nutrition. Celiac people have to worry about this because a lot of their microvilli, which help you get the nutrition to your bloodstream, tend to get flattened out. So that's why I try to instill in people who are trying to heal, who have chronic conditions, that they need a lot of time. And I recommend fasting because, like, I believe fasting would be the only way you could really regenerate those microvilli among getting nutrition sufficiency. That's my theory on it.
Okay.
But sorry, were you gonna say something?
Oh no, I was saying okay. And I wanted to ask also, if someone's fasting, I guess it depends on what you're trying to achieve. What counts as the minimum amount of time to really make an impact in your gut health, for example, or maybe burning fat off, that kind of thing? Like how would you approach that?
Well, you can always burn fat. Honestly, like that's why I tell people, like, if you have fat, you're super good off. Like, it actually peeves me a little bit when I see in the health communities people freaking out over someone making these huge transformations after losing a lot of weight. I would think in certain conditions, and some people have certain issues like a metabolic disorder, or they're like an eating disorder, like nervosa bulimia, right? Or they're anorexic. When people like that make transitions based on weight, that's impressive. But otherwise, it's not super impressive because all you have to do is eat a low carb diet and fast, work out. Like, it's super easy. And I have clients who are just like, for them to get any progress in their health, they have to go through these extremes, and that sucks, by comparison. So it's better to have the fat. That's right. Like, so I'm always really excited to have clients who have a lot of fat, because I'm like, yes, like, you have all this time in the world to fast, like, and fasting helps you just reset on so many levels. So anyway, without going too detailed, I would say that a 36 hours dry is the minimum for white blood cell proliferation. So what happens is you have an innate immune system and an adaptive. We're going to ignore the adaptive. So the innate is what essentially doesn't learn, as what medical institutions will say. But when you fast, they reset. So it's not so much that they learn, they just die. New ones come back. New ones come in. So it's kind of like, it's still learning technically. They're just kind of avoiding that and trying to also not talk about fasting, because that, is a cheap method to heal all kinds of disease. And so when you go about 36 hours dry, you reset your whole white blood cell supply. I'm taking this off of the Cell journal that was producing the fact that if you go 3 days fasting, your white blood cells reset, and the other journals that talk about how dry fasting would essentially be it would multiply water fasting by 2. Okay. So if you were to go a day and a half dry, it's equatable to, well, actually, I think some people were saying that it's almost 3 times more effective, but I think it may be more safer just to say to double it. Yeah. Because I don't think that the science out on it is exactly concrete. It's just something you can kind of go with. Yeah. I would also say they're completely different categories too. Water fasting is like a different beast altogether versus dry fasting. I think people can actually damage themselves on water fasting easier than dry fasting. And that's a whole other thing. But generally, yeah, I would say that day and a half dry is my go-to for people who are looking to get immunity. Like when I go out into the wild, do the survival school thing, and I'm eating a raw wild squirrel, I'm drinking from Giardia positive streams, I'm eating deer feces, whatever. People are like, what the heck? Like, how are you not getting sick? I'm like, dry fasting. Dry fasting and eating well. Like, you make yourself vulnerable to pathogens when you eat too many carbs. This is why people got sick from COVID and I didn't. Like, if you are constantly eating too, like, you need to be able to give your body some time to produce more white blood cells so they can constantly be like, bam, 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 bam. You know, because the innate immune system is like this shotgun, and it just keeps blowing stuff up, and it creates inflammation. It cleans up inflammation. But the problem is, like with this vaccine in particular, apparently, and this is from Dr. Tenpenny, she was saying that in the process by which they have to get that mRNA to the cell, they have to disable type 2 macrophages. And when that happens, I don't know why they would need to disable the M2s, which doesn't make sense to me, but they do. And so when your M2s are disabled, those guys are the cleanup crew for the M1s. The M1s go and just blow stuff up and create inflammation. And the M2s are supposed to come in and clean that inflammation up. So all these people who are jabbed are going to have a much more difficult time cleaning up their inflammation. They'll just kind of live perpetually inflamed. So it kind of precludes them from being able to pursue alternative remedies. Like in a lot of ways, when you're fasting, you create inflammation. It's natural. It happens because white blood cells become abundant and they do their job. And so you're going to get it inflamed. And if you don't allow your body to heal that inflammation, it can be deleterious. We all know that chronic inflammation is a big part of disease, but I don't think it's the root cause. People think inflammation is the root cause. But if you were to go all the way back to the real root, it's you. It's your decisions. And so ultimately, it's based on, how we're supposed to be living our lives out in the wild. You would be fasting like every now and then. And like, I've been a survivalist. I know you don't eat every day. I mean, there are several days when you're trying to go out on a hunt and find things to kill, and get your traps down. It doesn't happen every day. Some people are really good. And maybe by some miracle, like with all of the events by which people went out and traveled around and migrated for seasons, that they managed to hunt every day, get something every single day, that would be very rare and very difficult to do in a tribal setting. Yeah. Especially today, I think our food sources are far less abundant in the wild. But generally, yeah, you would have to go through a fast, and you would be eating way more ketogenic. You'd be eating mostly meat, more fats. You would get some fibers if you were to forage. There are certainly fibers, certainly all kinds of plants. But without salt, you're going to become mineral deficient. When I go back to the antinutrients, oxalic acid, which is what is the precursor to what is called an oxalate. An oxalate would be the compound of oxalic acid mixed with a mineral. So what happens is, as an antinutrient, the oxalic acid goes in, binds with magnesium, sodium, calcium, and that turns into an oxalate. So you have what's called a soluble oxalate and an insoluble oxalate. The soluble kinds are what go through your urine, and the insoluble go through your stool. Insoluble will be like bound with the calcium, and creates that particular compound. So oxalate, calcium oxalate. So a lot of those are contribute to like kidney stones in some way. Obviously, it would be more of the soluble variety, but the ones that are calcium in nature tend to get stuck in the tissue and disrupt immunity. So this is why I only go with certain vegetables with people. I'm like, hey, if you want to avoid these plant toxins, you don't want oxalates in your body, you avoid these veggies, right? And so anyway, it just gets really complicated when you get into plant toxins. It's like, because then there's the lectins. Yeah, those are really bad anti-nutrients. Did you know that gluten is a lectin? Yeah. And so, yeah, but there's more lectins now because of our farming standards. They've genetically modified them to produce more lectins. It's just to affect their bottom line more positively. Yeah. So it is what it is. The plant toxins are designed, plants all have defense mechanisms like animals do. An animal's defense mechanism is to run or to try to kill you, and then with plants, they try to kill you slowly. Like, well, with humans, they kill you slowly. With microbes and insects, they kill them pretty quick. So that's kind of what their main thing is. They like try to poison anything trying to eat them. As far as I don't necessarily agree with all the carnivore doctors on plant toxins being the #1 problem for people. I think it's a small deleterious problem. Even when in ketosis, you lose your own minerals regardless of what plant toxins you're consuming. And that's natural. You need that because you need the mineral supply to constantly be circulating, and you need to be able to chelate metals, and you're not going to do that in a carb-rich environment, at least naturally, that is. So anyway, it's just really complicated with the mineral topic, and I'm not necessarily the absolute expert. I tend to defer to Clark Engelbert and his nutritional analytics company. He does this whole mineral balancing thing.
So with the, if I can go back to the fasting thing, because I'm very interested in this and your perspective on fasting. So it sounds to me like what you're saying is any amount of time where you are giving your body a break from food is useful. Is there kind of like, aside from the white blood cell reset taking, say, 36 hours, are there other timeframes that you suggest to people like, hey, you're dealing with this, you're trying to achieve this, try 12 hours, try 24 hours. Like, is there that kind of thing in there for certain goals? I would say like, this is one, I call it I have it as a part of what's called the 137 protocol for clients who are business professionals. I recommend to them that they don't wake up, that they wake up not drinking and not eating, and they wait about 7 hours. This is enough time for your body to start to eat itself. And while someone looks at something catabolic is not good, it's a repair process. When you have fat stored up in your body binds toxins to them. And obviously during a fast, it's probably prioritizing the toxic fat stores. So when your body eats them, it takes them out through the lymph, and then they end up on the surface of your skin and you wash it off. Or it gets down to your feet and it kind of goes into the earth when you're walking, earthing and whatnot. So you have a large supply of lymph nodes in your feet. So I think a lot of people who are not grounding and not walking around barefoot are suffering from that, and they just put all the toxins in their socks and stuff, So that, I believe, is the reason why people get something like athlete's foot, because I think it's more of an endogenous, which means from within problem. The yeast get pushed out onto your skin and they just stay there. I think that's more of the problem than people getting it from like a gym shower. I would say that ringworm you could get from other people. That's a whole other thing. So with the fasting, generally like the 137 is to every day that you possibly can, that you want to, that you feel comfortably to, because you can lose a lot of weight doing this, is to wait that 7 hours. And then to once a month, do 3 days dry. And that's kind of that's what I do. That's what I do whenever I can. A lot of the time, like right today, I'm doing 137. I haven't eaten or drank at all. And so it's only when I feel like I have the fat supply. I'm a very ectomorph like build. More of like, I think it has to do with my Puerto Rican side. I don't gain a lot of mass. As hard as I try, like going up to like 5,000 calories in a day, carbs or fats, and it just doesn't jive. I don't get bigger. Yeah, the max I've ever gone is 160 pounds at 6 feet. And right now I'm about 155. Most of it's a lot of muscle tissue. But generally, when it comes to the fasting, it's very hard when you're more lean. And that's why I'm like very envious that people gain a lot of weight, because I fast all the dang time. And I think that has more to do with the people who are in colder climates. I think there was more of a need genetically to pack on weight. Yep.
For someone like me with a lot more Islander blood, I probably never needed the weight. So it's working against me. So I'm doing something that is better for people who are northern in nature. I believe fasting is healthier for people who are genetically meant for the cold. And because they have all this fat to use. But I would still say that you can fast effectively with someone of my body type. It just needs to be more intelligent. And I do more intermediate stuff. I have a tendency to just do like like I said, doing like 7 hours in the morning every now and then, or I always make sure to do 3 days dry a month, at least. I do like 3 to 5 days dry. Obviously there are people out there who go to extremes who will eat, I don't know, a lot of them are fruitarians, and then they call themselves breatharian. I think the Manly guy, Chris Manley, I think his name is, and then there's this other guy I just looked at today, who is Russian. A lot of the Russians love dry fasting. He just apparently came out of a 51-day dry fast, and that's longer than Jesus. But Jesus was in the desert. Like, Jesus did 40 days dry in the desert. So completely different. When you're in Russia and it's cold all the time, you're probably getting enough hydration in the air as by comparison. I think he did a hard dry fast too. He doesn't even bathe. So it's very extreme. The Russians, like, when they go to that extreme, it's very impressive. But I don't recommend people go over 3 days. Like, I generally don't. Like, I think in our society today, people are so toxic is that when they start to fast, tons of toxins get loaded off, and that dehydrates you. And also, if you're not used to ketosis, your liver busts out all these ketones, like in that post I made, and that dehydrates you as well. So it could be fairly dangerous to you, and you can actually end up creating organ failure if you haven't dealt with a lot of the toxins in your body and you haven't like practiced and created more of your dry fasting muscles, so to speak. I believe dry fasting, or fasting as a whole, is a lot like working out. Like, they get flabby if you don't constantly practice it. It's going to be harder on you. And it's better to be in ketosis prior, so you're not like stressing your body out. So I would say that someone who is, say, for instance, vegan or vegetarian, they're going to get a lot less done in their fast than with someone who is meat-based, because that person's already ketogenic. They're not having to swap off of carbs and go through the withdrawal phase. They're already ready to go. That's why for me, it's so much easier on my like raw carnivore diet to just go. My diet is so not very rewarding. It's like, it's nutritionally dense and super great. It makes me feel super good all the time, but it's not exciting. So it leads me to want to fast more.
Yeah, beautiful.
So it's literally like when you're eating raw meat, it's like fasting. It is fasting, but with nutrition. So and I've done the fruit thing too. That's addictive. Like that insulin regulation, all that sugar. I mean, it feels good. You consume the fruit, and but that kills my testosterone. I mean, it makes me super estrogenic. I mean, it's instant. I lose myself. I'm no longer in my predator brain. I can't stare down women in grocery store lines. I couldn't do it. Now
it's been a very important skill these days.
Yeah, it is. I love it. I mean, it was a big change. I mean, for me and all that endocrine health stuff, I mean, I went from kind of getting women to like getting to choose whatever woman I want. And it's just, now it's come this whole new life because of my testosterone levels. I feel more stoic. I feel strong, and my voice has changed too. My facial structure changed just so much, and it's been a long journey. But anyway, besides the point there, the fasting was very important to all of that. But anyway, you were asking about the methods. I would say, like I said, the 7 hours in the morning is really easy to do if you're a business professional and you're not addicted to caffeine, because obviously the caffeine addicts get their coffee in the morning. So, and it's not fasting if you drink coffee. And
speaking, sorry, I know you're going to continue that thought, but speaking of coffee, right? I am not of the view that it's necessarily a great thing to ingest. Where do you stand with coffee? I mean, I read that book, Caffeine Blues, and I was like, well, that's an eye-opener. Shit. And that was, mostly the extent of the body of knowledge I have on caffeine and why not to consume it. But where do you stand with it?
I think this is one of those things, like I made another post about health practitioners who have certain mentalities, like the ones who have a black and white approach, ones who are like the health magician, and all that. Like, a lot of them get real black and white about stuff like that. And they're like, Okay, caffeine does this to your cortisol. It obviously dysregulates your endocrine homeostasis. It affects your gut permeable layer. It makes it a little more acidic, and it contributes to holes in the gut lining or whatever they say, right? Or on some level, it's an anti-nutrient. And yes, those are negative things, but it's like with plant toxins, there are still benefits to coffee. If you're a business professional, you have a life and you're trying to get into being healthy, but you don't want to go through all the detox symptoms of being like, ugh, you know, you got to just drink the coffee. Like it's like you trade out, you know, a much worse negative for a lesser negative. Like sometimes coffee is the better negative.
Sure.
And so while it's inherently not optimal, you're not going to feel like your brain's really quick without the coffee until you've fully recovered. You've gotten through a lot of the toxins pulled out of your body, and you're now at a point where you're eating like almost just meat and your brain fog's gone. Then great. You know, it's just, for me, like if I were to go into or more than 50 grams of carbs in a day, I mean, I easily get into brain fog central. It doesn't work for me. I'm just not as fast. I just go real slow, and it's a lot different. And my hormones too changed all the time when I add too many carbs. So I haven't really achieved any cures. Okay, wait. There are some cures that I've made. I can't go back to clinical depression. I've tried to eat a bunch of pizza, a bunch of ice cream. I can't go back to clinical depression. So that's great. And I can't fully get rid of my testosterone changes. It would seem that a lot of them have made it to my cells. I think it has more to do with the building of the muscle tissue. When you're a man and you produce more muscle tissue, you create more of an endogenous supply, meaning produced from within. So you are constantly producing more free testosterone in your body, and it's getting to your cells, and it's changing who you actually are. So it is in a lot of ways important for a man to develop musculature, to actually develop more muscle tissue for them to stay perpetually higher in testosterone. And I think that's a big problem. That was a big problem for me because I didn't have a lot of muscle tissue either. And the estrogen was blocking that. Like no matter how much I hit the gym, I wasn't gaining because I had too much estrogen. I didn't have the testosterone. So I had to get rid of the blockages. I had to get rid of all the copper problems, the estrogen problems. And so now here I am, and I have a lot more muscle tissue, and it's easier to kind of have that.
What do you, in your experience, what were the biggest issues as far as the estrogen problem? What were the biggest sources of that challenge?
Probably mostly my mindset, you know, thinking, not really realizing that it was the estrogen.
But I mean, as far as, sorry, just to clarify, as far as, okay, so you realize that estrogen is the problem. Where is it coming from in, you know, your environment that is the biggest issue that you had to deal with and eliminate, or what have you?
Ultimately, it's always the diet. I mean, no matter what I do, I mean, when I can enter into a high testosterone state when I'm fasted, but that's not the diet. That's not diet. That's just me being me. And so when I eat certain foods, obviously a lot of them have phytoestrogens. Like if you were to eat soy, it can become artificially estrogenic. But that's different. I would still get estrogen when consuming something like raw milk.
Right.
But then raw milk has its own natural supply of E1, 2, 3, and 4. It's meant for babies. They need those exogenous hormones to be able to grow, both androgens and estrogens. So what's funny about raw milk is a lot of people are really into it because, especially men, a lot of men would get really high energy, obviously from the boost of all the hormones, but then they also feel very masculine because of the androgens. But I've had a lot of clients who develop bi thoughts, and I'm like, well, there's estrogen in it. And so in a lot of ways, you can become slightly estrogenic when you're consuming the raw milk. But I've also tried, and this is what I was saying about fruits earlier, even when I add fruit, my insulin goes up, and insulin pushes up estrogen too.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, it's the sugar, but raw milk would be worse. I would say that I do get way more estrogenic on raw milk while also being masculine. It's a very weird feeling. Yeah. And so while I can feel real bravado and with the raw milk, I'm also struggling with the estrogen side at the same time. You know, all I need is one trigger and it's done. But when I go into like eating just meat, the trigger can't hit. Hey, I can see, like, if my old mistress came back and she said hi, I would not be interested. But if I was on raw milk, I'd probably fall for it. You know, I mean, on some level, I'd feel it. I'd still try to say no. I'd still like fight it, you know, but my whole body would be wanting me to have it. Mm-hmm. But like now, I don't have to do anything with that. It's this constant state of like control with my mental state and my hormones. So yeah, I would say the diet is number one. It mixed between copper toxicity, the elevation of insulin, and on some level plant toxins, but I would say, and heavy metals, obviously, which is the copper problem, and mineral deficiencies always add up too, because if your copper is too high, your zinc is too low. And then, you know, if you're not getting enough zinc, you're not getting enough testosterone. I honestly think, like, I see the minerals, like, you know, you have the zinc and copper balance. I think that ratio is super important for endocrine health. Like if your zinc is low, like that's your means of getting your testosterone. And other means too, I was megadosing L-reuteri. That helped me a lot. Lactobacillus is a genus of bacteria that I actually think is actually something you could say is a necessary bacteria. Like if you lose it, you're not fully human.
Yeah. Okay.
So when you take antibiotics, you lose yourself. And so these antibiotics can hit the small intestine where lactobacillus tend to reside. It creates this fallout zone that destroys all the bacteria and they can't recolonize. So it goes on for years, if not permanently, and people end up without L-reuteri. So the reuteri species of lactobacillus is known for helping increase, for men to drop their testicles or to get, a deeper voice or to grow muscle. It's the testosterone bacteria, and men are extremely deficient in it today. They were tracking it since I think the 60s or 50s, and they found that only 40% of men have like an adequate supply of it, and back then. And they're saying now it's around like well under 10%. Mm. So we have so many people and it's obvious because there's so many men today who struggle getting enough testosterone, myself included. So I've definitely connected a lot of my problems back to like antibiotic damages or prenatal problems. I can go on and on about the prenatal problems, like mothers who wear a lot of makeup, like a lot of those chemicals get into their skin and it gets into the baby. Mm. Those are all endocrine disruptors. I think there's some of the bigger problems. So one big one, for instance, that's a carcinogen and an endocrine disruptor is the phthalate. It's spelled very funny. The P is silent. But it's essentially, once it gets into the cell, I mean, you could make a boy in the womb too masculine to the point of what you would call toxic masculinity, or they become very feminine if the supply is too low. So like if you have too much phthalate, like a lot of phthalate, it will make a man more masculine. Now, if you did a little bit of phthalate and say the mother only wore like so much makeup, or they got it from other sources, like they drink plastic bottles that are warm or whatever, that can make them more feminine. So it's obviously a big problem today. I would say the reason why my fasting, maybe the reason why I've healed so much, is that as a component, not only was the copper removed, but I believe the phthalates perhaps and other particular chemical compounds that disrupt endocrine health were removed from the cell. And this is a big part of fasting, is what's called autophagy. You've probably heard of it. Yep. But generally, when you go through autophagy, your cell compresses and it pushes all the pathogenic cell water, and then it replenishes with new water. And that new water is imperative to have, obviously, because you want to clean out the cell of pathogens and the xenobiotics. And when you do that, technically, you would heal your endocrine system because you don't have the chemicals in there anymore. And so really, really important to do. That's why I tell people, like, you got to just keep fasting. Like, just keep doing it. Like, at least do 3 days dry, or get yourself to the point where you can do 3 days dry within a month. and it just saved me quite a bit. Like all kinds of things have happened to me. Like I had a lot of gallstones built up. One time I didn't know I had them. I just dry fasted one time after trying to do raw meat. I was trying to master raw meat back then, which is eating raw meat, and it wasn't working. I was only getting like a pound in a day. I was getting super skinny. I just kept fasting in between. I would like do 48 days dry. Sorry, 48 hours dry. And then I would eat 48 hours dry, eat 48 hours dry, eat. I did that for like 60 days. And then in the last set of days, I did a 3.5 day dry fast, and my body pulled out. I felt this Band-Aid sensation in my liver area, and I ended up crudding out like 17 huge gallstones. And I had no idea I had all these gallstones in me. And I was like, wow, dry fasting removes gallstones. Great. And I didn't even know what gallstones were at the time. And so after that, I was able to eat a ton of raw meat. Because obviously your gallbladder is what gives you that bile you need to break down and emulsify the fats in the small intestine so you can absorb it. It just all clicked for me. I was like, holy crud, no wonder I wasn't eating a lot of raw meat. Like it was the fat, and I can't digest the fat. And then you need the fat for the energy or the diet doesn't work. And so that's why I tell people, I don't ever recommend people go on raw meat, because a lot of people have poor stomach acids, poor pH. They don't have enough bile, and they can't properly digest the fats, let alone abate any pathogens that are in the meat. Microbes within meat, like parasites, is a real thing. And I know a lot of people in the terrain world on the Asianis faunaplanus side of things, they think that all of those guys are friendly. But ultimately, when they make it to a certain part of your intestine, they just lay eggs. And those eggs are on the intestinal wall where the mucosa is. And the eggs, once they get to a certain stage, like stage 3 or 4, depending on the genus, they break into the intestine, like through the intestinal wall into your bloodstream. And they've done this in vivo, which means like observing it while the human host is alive and it's all working in tandem. Like it's an actual imaging of what's going on.
It's not a theory.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's crazy because like when that happens, holes are created in the intestine, and they're accessing your bloodstream. They're able to get into your red blood cells that go through your spleen, your liver, lay more eggs, and then go right through your bloodstream again. Like your white blood cells are killing them, but not all of them. It's like this constant war. And so this is the bigger problem with people who have Lyme disease and have babesia as a co-infection. But anyway, it's very problematic. Like I'm very much, I try to tell people like, watch out for the eukaryotic microbes, the ones that are bigger, the ones that have a nucleus, the bacteria, the archaea, the viruses, they're a different thing altogether. I go over this in the Opportunism Theory in great detail, but the eukaryotic pathogens are the ones that are widely more commensal. They will be there so that they just try to make it so they're not seen by the immune system by benefiting us somewhat, but they benefit even more when we constantly eat and we don't fast. So our white blood cells are dumb. Our white blood cells just kind of sit around, like our neutrophils eventually just kind of and they're like the majority of our white blood cells. Like they just kind of sit around. They don't know anything. They don't do anything. Macrophages too, all the innate immune system, they just get stupefied. So this is what my theory is on carnivore. So when people eliminate all those foods, they by effect end up naturally producing new white blood cells, and they end up catching the immune system up, and they give their body the time it needs to kind of like eliminate all those foods and kind of reset, so to speak. And what's unfortunate is I think the body all of a sudden recognizes what's going on. It sees that all of these pathogens have grown to all areas of the body already without them knowing. And it's trying to catch up. And that's why some people get extreme inflammation when they reintroduce carbs. Like for me, if I added a banana now, I get like 4 canker sores in my mouth. Jesus. And that to me is microbes in my oral microbiome coming out of hiding from like a 0 carb diet. And then my innate immune system blasting.
Yep.
So,
So is that useful? Do you think that's a useful thing to do from time to time? Is have a banana and then you like pull them out, smash them?
yeah, I've been trying this, but I don't ever recommend it to people because it's theoretical, and obviously inflammation leads people to death in a lot of ways. So I'm not going to be the guy who tells everyone to just let inflammation happen. Mm-hmm. But I will say that when you fast and create inflammation, you better at least try to fast even more to try to like get it down, or at least do something or understand that the inflammation is good, because mindset is everything. Like when you pump out stress hormones when you're fasting, that's not a fast, that's starvation. Mm-hmm. So, but if you were to go through a fast thinking it's really good for you, then it's completely different. Like I'm a really logical person to the point I almost thought I was like autistic, but I really, it was hard for me to believe that I could mentally do that. Like I could really affect how I am based on how I'm thinking.
Totally.
And it is that. What?
Yeah. I was just saying, totally, you're right. You reminded me of a story I read not long ago, and I forget the source of it now, but it was about a guy who was a prisoner of war in a camp, one of these concentration camps, where they basically just gave people like a starvation ration, to survive on. And everyone there was just emaciated, skeletal, fading away, except for this one guy who looked like he'd just arrived, but he'd been there for months. And they were like, what's your deal, man? Why are you so different to everyone else? You haven't lost any weight. What's going on? He was just like, basically his answer was, I'm not stressed about this. And just, he accepted his situation and worked with it and wasn't stressed. He wasn't in fear. He wasn't in a scarcity headspace, and his physiology reflected it.
Awesome. That's a beautiful example of that. That's great. Yeah. And honestly, like there's a lot of people out there, and that's one of my argument with some of the Seventh-day Adventists are like, with like a vegetarian diet, like a lot of them are really just in well mind. Like they live happy lives. They have a great community. They're accepted in their community. They're loved. So they don't have a lot of stress. That's a big factor. I mean, there's something called peristalsis that helps you to like move everything around these muscle contractions so you can kind of like get the bolus down and create the chyme, whatever. Anyway, so your body ends up shutting down this whole digestive process when you stress out. Like I had a client recently, she was in a panic, right? She ended up getting her digestive system was so screwed up that her stool, like she didn't have like, it came out with like chunks of fat, like it wasn't digesting. And I was like, wow, that would have to be pretty extreme because she's already carnivore. She's like pretty metabolically sound. And I was asking what the changes were in the last 2 weeks. It's like, oh, she's eating food, eating the usual. But then something really stressful happened in her job, her job atmosphere. And I was like, well, that's it. Like, and it's attached to all kinds of things for her. And I won't go into specifics, but essentially like it would hit her would stress her enough to where it can disrupt her digestive processes. I also investigated more, and I believe that she had oxidized some cholesterol, which would have led to gallstone formation, which would have led to poor bile secretion. And so that would have also contributed to her not digesting the fats. But as it were, the pain in her stomach went away when I talked to her kind of like through the psychological components of that stressful situation. But it all matters. The stress kind of exacerbates current issues. So while the root of it was probably like frying an egg, creating the oxidized cholesterol, it was also a part of it. The stress was a part of it. Like, absolutely. I mean, like for instance, I lost when I got really sick after that heartbreak. I mean, it's obviously all the stress, but yeah, super important, really important.
Do you, when you're working with someone, I get the impression that you take an individualist sort of approach and you assess people as individuals and see, okay, what are your needs? What's going on here? When you have to deal with, say, I got a few questions here. Maybe we'll have to run through them relatively quickly because we've already gone over an hour. But let's run through a few. Okay, so allergies. When you have someone come to you and they've got allergies, I know there's a billion different allergies. What is your, say, if you could create like a generalized picture of, you know, approaching allergies, what is your general? Yeah, I mean, I know you can't generalize too much because everyone's individual, but do you have certain things that you do with most people, say?
Do you mean allergies to food or seasonal stuff like environment?
Yeah, I'd say like if it was more of a, say, it seemed more like it was environmental or seasonal, like say, as opposed to, oh, well, I know I'm allergic to gluten and when I eat it, you know, I get messed up, that kind of thing.
Right. Allergies as a whole, like, I mean, honestly, things when it comes to certain metabolic factors like antinutrients, your body's always going to start to hate it. Like, it's good that it hates it. I mean, there's on some level, you can eventually come back to eating the gluten again, but it's never going to be an optimal thing.
Yep.
On some level, your body just doesn't want to turn back. That's okay. You know, but as far as other allergies, like certain nut allergies, that's more of a problem with your leaky gut syndrome situation. So like if you have holes in your intestinal lining or well, I think in scientific terms, like the tight gap junctions. I'm forgetting the exact terminology, but anyway, there are these gaps and it gets into the bloodstream. So when these particles of nut go through there, they're a little more dense. So they make it right in those holes and into the bloodstream. So your adaptive immune system is in there and it starts to blow them up and start to develop antibodies towards to the food. So like anytime that you eat that food, you develop an allergy to it now. And so that now, if you were to heal your intestinal lining, then you're not going to have that allergy. Now, if it's something that's like environmental, like it's like people who it's really fascinating, and I'm trying to encumber this. I'm trying to eventually write a whole thing on it. But people have histamine sensitivity. I believe that's linked to mold. I believe that the relationship between Penicillium aspergillus genus of molds and probably others, but those are the most common. And their spores are closely related to what's called the mast cell. It's a component of the immune system. It's very complex, but essentially when the molds and the mycotoxins are making contact with your body, your white blood cells go and act against it. So anytime that you consume something that has like a mold on it, your body will start to attack it. And a lot of white blood cells release something called histamine. And that's largely what I think is related to the mold toxicity. So like when someone eats organ meats and they get histamine reactions and nothing else, but no reactions to anything else, it's like, well, maybe explore the fact that meat has accumulated some level of mycotoxins because it's a hormone secreting organ. Molds and bacteria love hormones. That's the first thing to go. That's why the blood spoils faster. That's why the organs spoil faster, is because the microbes hoard hormones first. It's the number one thing they want. So this is why you would end up creating more histamine on that particular product. So because I've been trying to investigate this for some carnivores who are like not getting histamine from lean meat, but they're getting histamine from organs. And that's one of my thoughts. Vitamin A toxicity is a whole other thing because it's largely just with the liver. And I think that has to do with fasting problems. That's a whole other subject. But yeah, so I think with allergies, you just need to repair yourself.
Okay.
But I think specific allergies, like with the gluten thing, it's kind of, you're just better off because you don't want lectins. Like, there's no point because the gluten is going to contribute to creating more allergies anyway, because gluten, we know, contributes to intestinal lining permeability. It makes it where it's easier for microbes to drill into that lining. Another thing that I think is the root cause of that the holes in the lining is candida, because the hyphae that holds on to those metals will drill into your intestines or through the intestines into the bloodstream. So that's very important to understand. So people who are dysbiotic tend to be prone, or who have ever taken antibiotics are prone to these problems. And I had a ton of allergies as a kid, and I don't have them anymore. As far as with food, certain foods, I don't even know that I really have any gluten allergy or ever had at all. But I do know that I always go through a negative cycle of events when I consume any carbs anyway. So I don't even do that. So, yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, no, thanks, man. You mentioned organ meats, like, do you advocate any organ meats, or do you tend to stay away from them?
No, I advocate them all day long for people who can. The people who are histamine sensitive, who never fast, shouldn't, and I think that if you eat organs outside of the liver, you need to eat the whole head to tail thing. Like, because if you eat spleen, for instance, it was pancreas. So if you eat pancreas and you don't eat brain, you're going to have a really bad time with omega-6. Like, pancreas is loaded with the omega-6, but then brain is loaded with omega-3. So I don't think you should jump into head to tail without doing head to tail. Yeah. Like, people try to do head to tail by just doing liver or just doing heart and liver, and I do that because I can't really afford, and I'm not making a lot of money, so I can't afford to go kill a goat in my backyard. It just is what it is. But the people that can, especially even when they're raw feeding dogs, I educate on dogs too. Like, you got to do the whole thing. If you don't, they end up in balance. That's what it is. And that's a big part of like mineral balancing too. Like, carnivores end up mineral deficient all the time. Like, I'm sure I have at one point, and especially when I went into doing raw milk a lot, I'm sure I got too much calcium. I became slightly anemic. Because what happens if you drink too much calcium, especially the biounavailable kind through dairy, I think about 30% of it's bioavailable, but the rest isn't. So it can create a buildup effect, and it's problematic. So that can actually get stuck in the receptor sites where your iron's supposed to go, or, well, it competes with iron. And that's problematic. So that's why I tell people, like, hey, if you can do raw milk here, only do it 30 days and then don't go back. Like, some people get so addicted to it, they stay on it. And it's like, okay, you're lost, But yeah, raw milk is kind of addictive. It's once you get that high from those hormones, you never want to stop. People, like, some of my clients even fight. Like, they're just like straight up like addicts. They just get so angry about it. They're just like, there's nothing wrong with raw milk. It's the perfect food. And I'm like, nothing's a perfect food. But anyway, so yeah.
Maybe we could give people some sort of, and obviously we can't do like blanket recommendations or anything, but if you were to make suggestions for people, like takeaway, implementable type of things, what are yours? Like, so let's say people are like, oh, dry fasting, okay, let's try this. He said a few interesting things about, organ meats and, spending time letting my white blood cells regenerate and this type of thing. Let's say someone who's not, hasn't been working with you and just maybe relatively, just coming into this space. What are your kind of like guidelines as far as like, okay, let's start getting our shit together here?
I would make sure you get enough meat into your diets where you're developing a microbiome that's conducive to lacto-fermenting capacity. You get those lactobacillus species growing in your small intestine by eating a lot of meat. And once you get to a safer spot there, you can start to become more ketogenic. And from there, you can leg up into fasting. And so you're safer, better fasting, that is. And then you want to be mineral sufficient. So when you start entering ketosis, you tend to become dehydrated. So people drink a lot of water, and water is a solvent. That's what's dangerous with water fasting. So it pushes your minerals downstream. And so when you need to make sure to supply enough minerals. You need to get things like magnesium. We're never sufficient in magnesium. Like, you would have to eat only fish on a carnivore diet to manage magnesium. Otherwise, you just supplement it. And then you'd have to, you have to make sure you get enough calcium in your diet. Hard to do with carnivore, but people that I have going my cruciferous and allium version of that, they get enough because they're eating the cruciferous. The cruciferous have some calcium, especially broccoli. And so good to do that. You just got to make sure you get all the minerals that you need. And it's just complicated with carnivore. If you're not doing the expensive carnivore, we're getting enough fat, getting enough organs, getting enough bone or whatever, like from bone broth or marrow, you're going to become mineral deficient. You can abate all kinds of disease with that diet, but you can end up losing in other areas, like energy.
Okay, so when you say carnivore, I'm assuming you're talking 100% meat and nothing else, as opposed to, like, say, a paleo, which is a little bit more maybe balanced.
Yeah, well, paleo is much different because you're riding on carbs.
Right.
The second you exit that like 30 to 50 gram spectrum of carbs, like you're definitely no longer ketogenic. I argue that you're not even really ketogenic over 20 grams. So that ketogenic state is so much different. When you're not burning on carbs, you're in a different state of mind altogether. When you're in a carb mind, it's like the sedentary state where you're not really doing any fasting. You're just kind of benign. So I would say paleo is good for nutrition sufficiency, but they tend to be those diets tend to be loaded in plant toxins. So you're going to end up losing you're going to have your anti-nutrients hitting you all the time. So paleo dieters need to supplement a lot, just like carnivores, but it's worse for them in a lot of ways. Well, I guess not in some sense, because when you have carbs, your mineral supply tends to stay more intact. But then nothing's getting recycled. You have heavy metals just hanging out. So to get into a really like a great healing state, you want to be more ketogenic, like, or at least cycle yourself through it every now and then. But that's where you get into too much inflammation, because you can end up turning the healing switch on and all of your white blood cells are doing their job. But then you go back into a sedentary carb eating state, and then you have to deal with all the inflammation. That's not good. So that's why I had to warn people, is like, when they start doing this, there's no going back. Like, on some level, your body just starts to resent a lot of foods. And then that's why that bulletproof guy stopped carnivore, because he's just like, holy crud, like I can't even eat anything anymore. Like my body just creates inflammation. I don't understand. Like this diet's terrible. Like, so it's not for someone who's it's for if you're really serious. And it's usually the people who are very sick who go to carnivore. The people who are like Lyme disease, or the people who are bipolar disorder, the people who have PCOS, whatever. Like it's a big thing. Like it's a big change. It's a lifestyle change. So what I have people do by majority is the alliums and the cruciferous, like about 2 cups a day of that, and like 90% fatty meat. And that's a great diet to stabilize on, as long as you're getting enough fats in. Because if you don't get enough fats, you're just going to be super lethargic and hate your life. In some cases, if you can't seem to get enough energy, say for instance, because I have clients who do this, like they're working like a construction job, and they're also doing heavy lifting after that construction job every day. And they're like a dude who's over 6 feet. Like, you got to eat a lot of food to keep that kind of lifestyle up, and a lot of fat by consequence. So you got to be able to like create your own tallow or something and just like drink that stuff at night. And I also recommend with red meats, because some people are slow oxidizers. This is a mineral term from Clark's thing, but I actually believe in it. It's basically like your body's not oxidizing, I guess, the triglycerides fast enough in the bloodstream, and you end up slow and lethargic. So I recommend people who are like that eat their red meat at night, really stuff up on it when the day is ended, so that you can go into more of a sedentary state and let your body assimilate those fats for the next day. I never recommend it if you're like that, eating it in the morning. It can really turn your day down. And also, depending on how you cook things is important too. Ideally, you don't want to, some people do the air frying thing, but you got to watch out for the oxidation of it. And with certain foods, like with eggs,
Did you
Yeah.
say air frying?
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard this term, air frying.
Yeah. They have these things called air fryers. Yeah, I've never used one, so I'm not really an expert on it. But
Okay.
I imagine it's some of the same components to frying an oil. But I think all the same air can get trapped in food.
Right. Okay. Sorry, go on. You were going to say something else.
Yeah, so I would just like generally speaking, to optimize something like that, you just got to be very responsible about what your ketogenic diet is. I think you can ruin a ketogenic diet by going with keto friendly foods like those power bars and the ice creams that are pro ketogenic. You know, like the whole removing net carb, like having your net carbs based on your dietary fiber intake is ridiculous. Like, okay, it makes your stool move faster, big deal. Like, it doesn't necessarily doesn't crowd out the problem of carbs, because the carbs still break down into sugars and they still give your pathogens some food. Like that's the problem. Like the problem at the root of it all is your microbes benefiting from that glucose. Like only reason why I ever go on a carnivore diet, as boring as it is, but optimal, is to suppress those microbes. And you won't hear that from other medical doctors or natural doctors. Like all the people in the carnivore sphere who are educated are all about these plant toxins and bastardizing glucose. That's it. Like their enemy is insulin and glucose and plant toxins. And I'm like, there's so many logical holes to that. Like there are so many other things that go on in the human body system. And so I try to explain it, but I guess I'm the unschooled guy. I'm not like the dude who's super educated, but I pump out such great work online though. So at least people follow me, but eventually
sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say, yeah, every time I see a post of yours, I'm like, this guy knows his shit. He does a lot of work. He does a lot of study.
Yeah. If you ever read my blog, I got a lot of stuff on there, but it's all right. That's where I put my like bigger stuff. And then my doctor says group is where I pump out like some smaller scientific articles. That's where the majority of my science goes, and smaller bits. And then I share some of it on my personal page. My personal page, I go all over the board. I'm very political. And then some people go on my page and just like hammer me about what I'm posting. Like, this is my personal page. Like, it's my Facebook. You don't have to follow me.
That's right. I take it as an invitation. So, yeah, brother. I feel like, obviously you have a lot of knowledge and a lot of things to say. We could go for many more hours, clearly. But I want to respect your time. And I feel like we're getting to the point where it would be good to let people know, firstly, well, to finish any thoughts that you wanted to finish, but also like to let people know where exactly they can check out your stuff and follow you, your website, your writing, this kind of stuff as well. So over to you.
Yeah. Well, it's gut-goals.com. That would be my website. And then I have obviously my Facebook, and that's pretty much it. Like, I don't do anything else. Like, all my client base is on Facebook. I'm thinking about moving into doing Twitter now because the whole Elon Musk thing. And then I might do others. There's so many now. It's kind of exhausting, and marketing was my previous profession. So it's not like it's a big problem for me to do that. It's just kind of lazy about it. It's writing out scientific work is exhausting. Like, because you have to do all this research and you have to like really genuinely research, because I don't want to pump out lies and bullshit. So it takes time. I'm more of an inspirational writer, so I just kind of like say things what I feel like. But anyway, so my Facebook, Asa Santiago, and then the gut-goals.com is my website, and then my group that it's invite only, but if you mention the Brendan Murphy thing, I'll invite them. Like, it's the Facebook group is called My Doctor Says ... It's a play on words. It's like, my doctor says I'm eating too much cholesterol and I'm going to get heart disease. And then everyone in my group is going to be like, that's not true. Here's the alternative perspective. So Yeah, they don't, and there's no medical advice given, as a disclaimer. It's like more of like, this is what I would do on a personal level. So anyway, yep, that's it.
Beautiful, man. Awesome. Well, I encourage everyone to go and check out your website, gut-goals.com. Was it .com? Yep.
Yeah.
And join the Facebook page. Tell them Brendan sent you. And I know Asa could talk for a long time. And go and check out. I'm keen to check out some of those articles you mentioned as well. So, are they easy to find, those ones that you did name earlier on?
Yeah, it's in the blog part of Gut Goals.
Cool.
Opportunism Theory isn't open yet. I have a password on it, but if you guys, and if they want to read it, they can. The password is Opportunism without a capital. It's in its beta phases right now, so I have to add more science to it, but it has roughly well over 100 scientific citations. It's a very large article. It goes into like how viruses may not actually be causing disease, but may actually be a part of the white blood cell system. It goes into how eukaryotes cause disease and how prokaryotes do, and it talks about controversies behind causes to viral diseases and like oncogenic viruses, and it's just a whole thing. But if people are interested in that, like interested in terrain theory or germ theory and my middle ground opportunism theory, they can go and read that. But if they go on the phone, if you log into it from the blog, it'll kick you to the homepage. You just have to go back to the blog page and then it'll let you in. So
Got it. All right. If you're a mobile phone person, make a note of that. Awesome. Asa Santiago, ladies and gents, it has been most interesting, brother, and I appreciate you taking almost a couple of hours now to have a chat with me, man.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry.
If you're sick and tired of cancel culture and censorship on social media, please feel welcome to join me and thousands of red-pilled folk at my own independent alternative, truth.network. That's http://trooth.network. See you there. I've experienced censorship on no less than 4 different platforms so far, so if you'd like to help me get my work past the censors, please do subscribe and share it around for me. And also remember to join me on truth.network, which is the platform I created for our conscious community to connect and gather away from the censors after Facebook shut down our page in 2018. So head over there, create your free account at truth.network. It's TROOTH, and I'll see you inside. Take care.